When the world turns its back on you, the only way forward is to strike back with everything you have left. Witness the cold, blue intensity of a soul seeking justice in a world of shadows. Hit that subscribe button now and watch the strike unfold in high definition.
I didn't cry at my father's funeral. Not because I didn't love him. I loved him more than I've ever loved anything in this world. But because my sister-in-law was watching me the entire time, and I'd learned years ago that she counted my tears like currency she could spend against me later. My brother stood at the front of the room giving the eulogy, and I sat in the third row because she had decided, without asking anyone, that the front 2 rows were for immediate family. I am immediate family. I am immediate family. But I sat in the third row and I held my mother's old rosary and I did not cry. That was 6 weeks before everything fell apart. My father's name was Gerald. He was a retired civil engineer who spent the last 4 years of his life in a recliner by the window. Watching birds at the feeder, he couldn't fill himself anymore. I drove 40 minutes each way, 3 times a week, to fill that feeder, to bring him groceries, to sit with him through his medication schedule, his physical therapy appointments, his bad nights. My brother. I'll call him my brother because that's what he is, even now. He lived 12 minutes away. He came on holidays. When my father's health started declining seriously, about 2 years before he died, my brother convinced him to sign a financial power of attorney. Just a formality, he told me on the phone, in case Dad needs someone to pay bills when he can't. I didn't argue. I was tired from driving and caregiving and working full-time. I thought, fine, let him do something. I didn't know that within 8 months, my brother had moved money from my father's savings into a joint account he controlled. I didn't know that he had renegotiated my father's investment portfolio through a financial advisor he had personally selected, a woman named Simone, who it would later turn out was his wife's college roommate. I didn't know any of it because I was busy filling a bird feeder and holding an old man's hand through the night sweats, and because I trusted my brother the way you trust someone you grew up with, which is to say blindly and fully and like a fool. My father died on a Tuesday in October. By Thursday, my brother had changed the locks on the family home. I found out because I drove over that Saturday to water the plants. My father had an enormous fern in the kitchen window he'd had for 15 years. I'd been keeping it alive. I put my key in the door and it didn't turn, and I stood there on the porch for a full minute trying to understand what I was feeling before I understood that what I was feeling was the specific cold of being locked out of a place you thought was yours. I called my brother. He said they were securing the property during probate. He said it in the tone of someone who had rehearsed the phrase. His wife's voice was in the background saying something I couldn't hear. The estate attorney meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday. My father's will, the one I had seen, the one he had shown me himself 2 years before his death, split everything equally between my brother and me. The house, the investments, whatever remained in savings, equal. He had been clear about it. He had actually pointed at the word equal on the page and said, "You see that, honey?" Because he knew his son, even then. I wore my good blazer to the meeting. I took the train because I didn't want to deal with parking, and I was running slightly early, so I stopped at the coffee cart outside the building to get something warm. That's when I saw the man. He was sitting on the low concrete wall near the building entrance, not quite on the sidewalk, not quite in anyone's way. He was older, maybe late 60s, and he was holding a paper cup from the same coffee cart, and he was wearing a coat that was clean but thin for October. He had a leather satchel on the ground between his feet that looked expensive and out of place, like something he'd owned for a long time. I don't know why I stopped. I'm not usually someone who stops, but something about the way he was sitting, not slumped, not defeated, just quietly watching the street, made me stop and ask if he was all right. He looked up. He had sharp eyes, the kind that feel like they're reading something behind your face. "I'm waiting for someone," he said. Or I was. I think they may not be coming. I don't know what made me ask the next question. Maybe it was the satchel. Maybe it was just the morning. "Are you headed into this building?" "I have a meeting with Hartwell and Associates," he said, 11th floor. But the person who was supposed to escort me seems to have had a change of plans. I looked at him for a moment. "That's where I'm going," I said. "I can take you up." He smiled. Not warmly, exactly. More like a person who is used to assessing things. "I'd appreciate that," he said. His name was Edmund. He didn't tell me much in the elevator, just that he had some business to sort out, some loose ends. He walked slowly, and I shortened my stride without thinking about it. The way you do when you've spent time with someone who needed you to slow down. When we walked into the conference room, my brother was already seated at the table. His wife was next to him, even though she had no legal reason to be there, and neither of them looked up right away. The estate attorney, a man I'll call the attorney because I still feel something unpleasant when I think about what he tried to do, was shuffling papers. Then my brother looked up and saw Edmund. His face did something complicated, a kind of stillness that was actually the opposite of stillness, like a lot of movement happening very fast beneath a surface that was trying to stay flat. "What is he doing here?" my brother said. Not a question, a statement with the shape of a question. His wife put her hand on his arm. Edmund sat down across from them. He set the leather satchel on the table and folded his hands on top of it and said nothing. He just looked at my brother with those reading eyes. I sat down next to Edmund because it was the only thing that made sense in that moment, and because the look on my brother's face told me that whoever Edmund was, my brother already knew, and my brother was afraid. I should back up. 2 days after the locks were changed, I'd gone back to the house. Not to get inside. I knew I couldn't, but because I couldn't stop thinking about the fern, and because my grief had nowhere to go and walking helped. I stood in the backyard for a while, near the garden my father had kept before his hands gave out. The yard backed up to an alley, and the alley had a low fence, and on the other side of the fence was the neighbor's recycling bin and a larger trash area for the properties on that block. My father's file cabinet had been placed outside near the alley. Not at the curb, but close. In that in-between space, that means someone has decided something is worthless. The cabinet was old, a green metal 2-drawer thing he'd had in his home office since before I was born. The top drawer was slightly open. I climbed over the low fence. I don't know why. I think I just needed to touch something of his. Inside the top drawer were hanging folders, the kind with color-coded tabs. Most of them were what you'd expect. Old tax returns, appliance warranties, the title to a car he'd sold in 2019. But at the back of the drawer, tucked behind everything, was a folder with no tab at all. Inside the folder were printouts, bank statements, but not the ones I recognized, not the accounts I knew about. A savings account I had never seen, with a balance that had been, 18 months before my father's death, just over $400,000, and a series of transfers, systematic, regular, all of them to an account number I didn't recognize, in amounts just under $10,000 at a time. I knew enough to know that transfers structured to stay under $10,000 had a name. I had a cousin who worked in banking compliance who had once explained it to me at a family dinner. Structuring, she called it. It's what people do when they want to move money without triggering federal reporting requirements. I took the folder, I went home. I sat at my kitchen table and I photographed every single page. Then I called my cousin. She was quiet for a long time after I explained what I was looking at. "Lauren," she said. "Wait, no, I need to use a different name for her. I'll call her my cousin." She said my name and then was quiet. "Is this what I think it is?" I asked. "You need to talk to an attorney," she said. "Not the estate attorney, a different one, today." I called 4 attorneys. The 4th one could see me the next morning. Her name was Adrian, and she was small and precise, and wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck. And she looked at the photographs on my phone for about 4 minutes, and then looked at me and said, "Has your brother filed to probate the will yet?" "The meeting is in 2 days," I said. "Good," she said. "We're going to be there." That is how I ended up in that conference room with Adrian on one side of me and Edmund on the other, facing my brother across a mahogany table. Adrian had called Edmund. I didn't know that until later. Edmund was, and I want to be precise here because this still feels unreal to me. Edmund was a retired federal bank examiner who had spent 30 years flagging exactly the kind of financial patterns I had photographed in that folder. He'd been recruited to consult on estate fraud cases through a nonprofit that Adrian had worked with for years. He was not a beggar. He was not a homeless man on a wall. He was a man in his late 60s whose mobility had been limited by a hip replacement 4 months earlier, who had been waiting for a colleague who hadn't shown, and who I had helped carry his coffee and offered an elevator. That's all. That's the whole coincidence. And yet, my brother had known Edmund, not personally, but professionally. Several years earlier, my brother had been peripherally involved in an audit at his previous employer that Edmund had consulted on. My brother had been cleared, but he had not forgotten the name. And when Edmund walked into that conference room, my brother's body understood before his brain did that the morning was not going to go the way he had planned. The estate attorney tried to run the meeting as if nothing was happening. He started presenting documents, a new will dated 14 months before my father's death, leaving the house and the majority of the estate to my brother, with a note citing my brother's primary caregiving role. Primary caregiving role. I looked at that phrase and thought about 4 years of driving. About the bird feeder. About the night my father had a reaction to a medication change at 2 in the morning, and I had been the one there, on the floor next to his chair, holding his hand until his breathing steadied. I said quietly, "That's not his signature." My brother said, "Excuse me?" "My father's signature," I said. "I have 30 years of his signature on birthday cards, on letters he sent me in college, on the card he gave me when I graduated. That is not his signature." The estate attorney said something about document authentication. Adrian opened her briefcase. She had obtained in 2 days. 2 days. I still don't fully understand how bank records subpoenaed through an emergency motion tied to the structuring concerns my cousin had flagged. She had an affidavit from a document examiner about the signature. She had the timeline of transfers mapped against the dates of the POA. And Edmund. Edmund had reviewed the records my cousin had flagged and written 4 pages of analysis in the language that federal regulators speak. The kind of language that makes attorneys go very still and very pale. The estate attorney went very still and very pale. He asked to take a recess. During the recess, my brother's wife left the room and did not come back. I could hear, through the door, someone making a phone call in the hallway, speaking in a low, urgent voice. When the attorney came back, he said he needed to disclose a conflict of interest. He said he had become aware that his firm had prepared the second will under circumstances he had not been fully informed of. He said he was withdrawing from the matter effective immediately. My brother sat at the table alone. He looked smaller than he had at our father's funeral. He looked like someone watching a wall fall toward him and understanding that there is no way to move fast enough. "You structured the transfers," I said, not to hurt him, just because I needed to say it out loud, to make it real. "You used the POA to drain his savings while he was still alive. You forged a new will. You changed the locks on his house 2 days after he died." He didn't say anything. "You put his financial files in the alley," I said. "You were going to throw them away. Did you think I wouldn't look?" He looked at the table. "He watched birds," I said. "At the end, that was the thing he loved. He watched the birds out the window, and I drove 40 minutes to make sure the feeder was full because he couldn't do it himself. You lived 12 minutes away." I stopped. There was nothing else I needed to say. The legal process took 8 months from that Wednesday. My brother's attorney, a new one, not the estate attorney who had represented their arrangement, negotiated. There were admissions. There were repayment agreements. The forged will was invalidated, and the original was probated as written. The structured transfers had to be returned with interest, which significantly complicated my brother's finances in ways I am not going to describe, because they are not my story to tell. Only my father's money and my father's house are mine to speak about. The house still has the fern. I moved back in 6 weeks after the estate settled because it made financial sense, and also because I needed to be somewhere that still had his handwriting on the spice jar labels, and his reading glasses on the side table, and the bird feeder outside the window that faces east. I fill it every week. Edmund sent me a note after the legal process concluded. A handwritten note on plain stationery, the kind of note a man writes when he is formally retiring from a long career and wishes to mark the end of something with some care. He said that in 30 years of examining financial records, the most reliable variable was not the amount of money or the sophistication of the scheme. It was always, he said, what the person thought would be thrown away. My brother threw away a green metal file cabinet and a folder with no tab. My father had been an engineer. He had labeled everything. He had kept everything, even things that, to someone else, looked like clutter. I have the folder. I have the photographs I took at my kitchen table at 1 in the morning. I keep them in the top drawer of that same green cabinet, which I have brought inside and placed in my father's old home office, where it has always belonged. There's a lesson here about what people show you when they think you're not worth accounting for, about what gets thrown out versus what gets kept, about the difference between the person who holds the power of attorney and the person who holds the hand. My father used to say, and this is the truest thing I know about him. He used to say that you learn more about a person and how they handle money that isn't theirs than in anything else they ever do. He was right. He was right about that. And he was right to write my name in his real will, the one with his real signature, the one I have a photograph of on my phone, and a certified copy of in the file cabinet in the room where he used to sit and watch the birds come and go. I still don't cry in front of people who might count my tears. But alone, in that house, in the mornings, I do. And it helps. And the birds come. I've thought a lot about what my brother believed when he changed those locks. He believed I was the kind of person who would grieve quietly and go home. He believed that someone who spent 4 years driving 40 minutes each way to fill a bird feeder was, by definition, too tired and too soft to fight back. He looked at everything I had given and decided it made me smaller. That's the miscalculation that cost him everything. There's something I've come to understand about the way greed works. Not in some abstract moral sense, but practically, mechanically. Greed makes people careless. It makes them move fast when they should move slow. It makes them throw things away. My brother pulled a green metal file cabinet to the edge of an alley and didn't think twice about what was inside it, because he had already decided that I wasn't worth accounting for. That decision, that single arrogant decision, is what unraveled 3 years of careful maneuvering in the span of one Wednesday morning. I think about Edmund a lot. Not because of what he knew or what he did in that conference room, but because of what he said in his note afterward, that the most reliable variable was always what people thought would be thrown away. He had spent 30 years watching financial crimes, and that was the through line. Not sophistication, not greed, just the thing a person discards when they believe no one is watching. My father was an engineer. He labeled things. He kept things. He believed that documentation was a form of respect for the thing being documented, for the person who might need to find it later. My brother saw that habit as clutter. I saw it as my father, still speaking. Resilience isn't a feeling. I used to think it was something you either had or didn't, some internal quality that certain people were born with. I don't believe that anymore. Resilience is just what happens when you keep showing up past the point where someone decided you would stop. I kept driving 40 minutes. I kept filling the feeder. I kept looking in drawers that someone else had decided were garbage. Not because I was strong in any dramatic sense. I was exhausted most of the time. But because I couldn't figure out how to stop caring about the things my father had cared about. That consistency is what intelligence actually looks like in practice, I think. Not brilliance, not strategy. Just paying attention over time. Noticing the folder with no tab. Knowing your father's signature well enough to recognize when it isn't his. Calling the right cousin. Taking the photograph. These are small things. They're the kind of small things that people who are too busy acquiring power never bother to do because they've already decided who in the room matters. My brother decided I didn't matter. And because he decided that, he got careless. And because he got careless, I have my father's house and my father's fern and a certified copy of my father's real will in the top drawer of a green metal file cabinet that belongs inside, where it always should have been. What you do with what isn't yours tells everyone exactly who you are. My father knew that. He said it plainly. I just didn't understand until the end how precisely he had been watching and how carefully he had already written down what he wanted done about it.